there. All right, so today we're looking at complex fractions, which is kind of a scary word because, yeah, what we're going to be doing is looking at some stuff that looks pretty complex. What it really means is that you have fractions caught up inside of other fractions. And so this first example that we have here, be sure to follow along in your notes. You got this 25 over x squared right here being divided by a whole nother fraction. All right, here's the deal. We just got done doing multiplication and division of rational expressions, so this is really the same thing as seeing it written 25 over x squared divided by x minus 2 over 5x. It is the same thing, just written with a fraction bar instead of a division sign. And so if you recall, whenever we were dividing, we changed it to multiplying by the reciprocal. So that's what we're going to do, same thing. All right, so let me get rid of this, because I don't really want to have to rewrite that every time. I don't want you to think that you need to do that. All right, so what I am going to do is I'm always going to take this bottom one and bring it up, and I'm going to flip it and turn it into multiplying by the reciprocal. So the 5x is going to be on the top, and the x minus 2 is now on the bottom. And now I'm multiplying these two things together here. All right, we look to do any reducing that we possibly could do. It looks like I have an x here that could reduce with one of these x's, so that would just become an x to the first. And that's really all there is. The 5 and the 25 are both on top, so they can't reduce. Remember, you have to have one thing on the top and one on the bottom. So it really just ends up being a 125 over, we have that x, and then we have the quantity x minus 2. All right, so a lot of times with complex fractions, there's not going to be a lot of reducing. It's really more a matter of kind of rearranging it so that you don't have fractions inside of other fractions. You're probably going to have a fraction for an answer, but at least just one big fraction. All right, let's try another one. Here's number 2, and same deal. You got one fraction on top, and then you have this fraction bar right here that shows division. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this u squared over 16, and I'm going to bring it up and change it to multiplying by the reciprocal. And then we hope that there's going to be some kind of reducing that can go on. Now notice on this one that this numerator, this 3u squared minus u, can actually factor a little bit. And so I'm going to go ahead and take the time, since this is our notes and we want it to look kind of neat that we can follow. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this, and I'm going to pull, it looks like I can pull a u out. So then I'll have 3u minus 1. That's all over the 16. And that's going to get multiplied by, and I've got a 16 over a u squared. And then I'm looking for any reducing, and that 16 is jumping out at me. Those can reduce. And then this u that I factored out with a u squared, that can reduce. And I have 1 extra on the bottom, so that would turn into a 1. All right, I think that's all I've got. So then my final answer would be, when I multiply straight across, 3u minus 1. And on the bottom I still have a u. And remember that you don't get to reduce these u's here, because this u on the top is caught up inside that subtraction. So you're done. That's your final answer right there. Let's try something that's a little bit harder. On this number 3, what you notice here in the denominator is that you have two fractions that are being added together. And so you have to, the whole idea of multiplying by the reciprocal only works if it's just one fraction, not if you have two separate fractions. So my first job here is going to be to go ahead and do the addition between these two fractions and get them condensed into one. So that takes us back to what we did yesterday, where we had to add fractions. So we're going to start off and we're going to get a common denominator between those two fractions, and I'm going to ignoring the numerator for right now. And so when I look at what I have an a squared and a 25. So my common denominator is just going to be a 25 and an a squared. So I'm just going to multiply by each other. All right, so then 25 times 5, that's 125, plus, I'm going to go ahead and condense this. Now that we've spent a whole day doing that, I'm going to go ahead and condense this all in one shot in one step, because that's all going to be over that common denominator 25a squared. Okay, on the top, I still have the 3/5. So now I'm ready to bring this up and multiply by the reciprocal. So that 3/5 is actually going to get multiplied by a 25a squared over 125 plus 9 squared. That's a plus. 125 plus 9a squared. And then I'm looking to do any possible reducing that I could do. Now remember, you can only reduce when things are being multiplied, and so this whole thing here is all caught up with that addition, so I can't pick it apart. But I do have this 25 times a squared. Since that's being multiplied, that could be picked apart a little bit, and so what I see here is that I could take a 5 into 5 and a 5 into 25 and reduce a little bit that way. All right, and I think that's probably all the reducing I'm going to be able to do. So let's multiply straight across. On the top, I have a 3 times a 5, so that's a 15, and that a squared is still sitting there. On the bottom, I have a 1 times, so I don't think it's necessary to write the 1. I'll just have the 125 plus 9a squared that's in my quantity there. And that's my final answer right there. All right, this one is very similar, so I'd like you to give this one a shot by yourself. Look at your numerator. First thing you're going to have to do is condense these two fractions into one big fraction. So go ahead, pause the video, and work on getting a common denominator there and combining those into one fraction. And then keep going if you can, and then come back to me. Go ahead and pause. Okay, so this is where you should be. You had to get a common denominator. It would have been 5u, and when you got that, you would have ended up, after you condensed it together, a 125 plus 16u over 5u. So now I'm ready, once I have that as all condensed as one fraction, I'm ready to bring this up and multiply by the reciprocal. So change this to multiplying by a 25 over u. And then you're looking to do any reducing that you can redo. And so what I see here is a 5 with a 25, so that can reduce. And nothing I can do with that u, because remember that the 125 plus 16u is its own thing with that addition in there. It works as a quantity. And so I think all I have then is on top, I have a 5. Out in front, I would move that to the front, and I would still have the quantity, 125 plus 16u. And on the bottom, the 5 canceled out, but I still have the u. But I have another u over here, so u times u is going to get me a u squared for a denominator. And that's my final answer. All right, last one. I wanted to throw one that looked a little bit different at you here. The bottom, same deal. That denominator is two separate fractions. We need to get a common denominator and condense that. What's weird is that the numerator is just a 4. And sometimes your numerator will be just a number, sometimes the denominator. I kind of think it helps sometimes to go ahead and write it as a fraction. So as I'm simplifying this one, I'm probably going to change that 4 to a 4 over 1. But let's go ahead and start with the denominator first. You got to get a common denominator so that this can condense. My common denominator will be a 4x squared. So then if I have a common denominator of a 4x squared, in the numerator I'll have a 3x squared, and then it'll be a plus 16. Now, up on the top, instead of it just being a 4, I'm going to write it as a 4 over 1. I think that helps me because this next step, when I bring this up and change it to multiplying by the reciprocal, then I'll have two fractions, so I can kind of tell better how everything lines up. So my 4x squared is now going to be on the top, and my 3x squared plus 16 is now on the bottom. As far as any reducing, this is its own thing. And so both of the 4's are on top, so that's not going to reduce. I don't really have any reducing. I'm just going to multiply straight across. Final answer would be a 16x squared over 3x squared plus 16. No reducing. All right, so this is a pretty short assignment today, just some quick little complex fractions. Go ahead and get started on your homework. Good luck.